grandma, and that's actually, we just took that video or that picture a couple weeks ago when we were back in Iowa. My grandma, we just moved her out of her house. She lived in a different town than my mom and my aunt, and they would drive over, get her, take her to the Y, take her swimming, drive her back home. Next day she wanted to go grocery shopping, take her back. So it was like an hour and a half round trip by the time they were driving everywhere, let alone sitting there and waiting for her to either go swimming or walking or get groceries, whatever it was. So they just moved her to the same town. So that's her, and we literally just moved her this day. So she moved into an apartment that's like on the golf course, and it's like everything she wanted. And my grandma's 91 right there, 91, 92. I think she's gonna be 92. My grandma probably about, she was 85. So she went to the YMCA and she swam her laps, and she got out and she was in the locker room and she slipped and she fell and she broke her hip. She, anytime you have an osteoporotic fracture, especially of the hip, there's, okay, I'm gonna tell you some stats and they're kind of a little upsetting, but 20% of the time the person dies within the next year. The other third of people within the next year are admitted to a nursing home or some sort of like facility where they have to be helped and taken care of. And then the other third go back like to their normal everyday life. My grandma, thankfully, even at 85, healed up and went back to her everyday life. She was still living with my grandpa, did gardening, walking, swimming, all that other stuff that she loves to do. She is kind of like when we look at all the risk factors, she basically just crushes every single risk factor that you might have for osteoporosis. So she's a small statured female. She's white, or Caucasian, sorry, I'll be politically correct. She's a Caucasian, she's a smaller frame, a small stature, she's underweight. So there's all these little things. And then along with that, she still fully follows a low fat, low sugar, kind of a diet in that way. So there's a lot of artificial stuff in her life. To this day, margarine, like I don't even know if people still eat margarine. Like you open a fridge, like, oh, that's like a molecule or two away from plastic. That's literally disgusting. So there's like margarine in her cupboards, and she would use Splenda. I don't think she does anymore, but for a long time she was using Splenda like to make cookies. And she went swimming. Never, my grandpa would go and lift weights, and he would go and walk, and she would only go swimming. She didn't want to go lift weights. She didn't want to do anything weight bearing. She didn't want to. My knees hurt, and I get that. And I understand that, but there was like no getting around it. I'm just gonna swim. I love to swim. I feel great when I swim, and swimming's the best thing for me. And there's all these little things. When I start looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, no wonder you have osteoporosis. Like that makes sense to me. So as we go through this, I'm going to show you risk factors and then everything that we can do to prevent it. And then if you have it, what you can do to stop bone loss, start to repair bone, and how we can strengthen those bones. So osteoporosis, basically it's a condition where the bone, I don't want to say wears away, but it almost becomes spongy. It becomes not as strong or not as tensile. There's not as much strength to it because bone basically has begun, or calcium has begun being reabsorbed and used in other places because it's not being utilized where it's at. So instead of this one, you see this normal bony matrix. You can see how filled in it is. The next one over to the osteoporosis is the osteoporotic one. So you can see the big divots and the big holes all throughout it when there's nothing in there. It's like these two beams. If this was all filled in with beams, it's gonna be 10 times stronger than just two and then trying to put things in between. The weakened bone then becomes a result is breaks, or fracture, or a compression fracture. So there's two different types of break, because the most common places for an osteoporotic break is a hip. So that's going to be a clean break. A rib will be a clean break, but then compression fractures usually happen in the spine. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And it's it's common. It is common to have spinal compression fractures. Even when I take x-rays of people now, someone that's an older woman, I'll go and I'll take an x-ray. I'm like, oh, did you know that this one is a fracture? Boom, boom, boom. They're like, no idea. So they're pretty common. So some facts. We start losing bone mass after 35. Once you hit menopause, you start to lose bone mass even faster. Key risk factors for osteoporosis include genetics, lack of exercise, lack of calcium, vitamin D, magnesium, adults, or a history of a fracture as an adult, cigarette smoking, alcohol consumption, all those things increase our risk factors. And a lot of times with osteoporosis, there's no sign or there's no symptoms that you have it until there's a fracture. And then that's how they know, oh, she has an osteoporotic fracture. So it's just like anybody, it's just like a subluxation, right? Because a lot of times with subluxations or those misalignments in vertebra, a lot of times we don't know that there's an issue until, boom, we start having pain, we start having discomfort. But for a long period of time, that bone is having abnormal breakdown or abnormal wear and tear before we start having any of those issues. So when you look at this person right here came in for neck pain. Can you guys see that? I tried to make it big enough that you could see.
Yeah, we can see pretty good.
Enough.
Yeah.
They came in for neck pain, but when I look here and I start looking at those bones and how they've worn down and degenerated, I'm looking at something that's at least 2, 3, getting into 4 decades old. But they're like, oh, I've never had an issue in the past. I've never had pain or discomfort. I've never, nope, not me. So the body let that person break down for a period of time, right? Only about 10 to 30% of your nervous system is there to detect pain. That means the other 70 to 90% of the nervous system is there for functionality, right? Those same bones that are broken down right here go to the thyroid, they go to the thymus, they go to the tonsils, larynx, pharynx. So you usually don't wake up in the morning and be like, oh, my tonsils, they're only working at 40%. Because you can have up to 60% shutdown of nerve supply without having pain or discomfort. So it's the same thing, that same wear and tear, that breakdown happens, same as osteoporosis, same as the subluxation, same as heart disease, same as cancer, same as diabetes, all those things that kind of sit under the surface without there being, whoa, it's in your face, a problem. So I think even with osteoporosis, this is the group that I have. I have women here. I don't want to say I have more mature women because that's not the case. I have women here, but really I should have people under 35 here because the best thing to do about osteoporosis is to prevent it. So I'm like, realistically, my crowd should be everybody under 35 years of age, even though it's not, and it stinks. Because one of the best things you can do is prevent it. So no symptoms tells there's a fracture, and diagnosis, it's suggested by x-ray, and then an x-ray isn't really even that great. When I see an x-ray and I can see bone that's beginning to break down, it shows up differently than other x-rays. By the time I can see it on my x-ray, there's already been significant bone loss. So that's why they do like DEXA scans or bone density scans. They do those instead because they tell you a better idea of how much is lost. But by the time I can see it, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's something over 30% bone loss has already happened at that point. And that's pretty darn significant when I see it. So signs and symptoms we talked about, right? There's no signs or symptoms for the most part unless there's some sort of a fracture. And even when there's a fracture, it's usually pinpoint pain. So if you have a rib that's fractured, it's usually pain or discomfort right here, and that's it. And a lot of people won't do anything about it. 6 to 8 weeks later, it goes away. I don't know, it was weird. I had pain or discomfort here for a while, but it's gone now. Same thing in the spine. A lot of times even with compression fractures, it'll hurt for a little bit. 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in, you're like, huh, went away. Must not be anything. So you see this person right over here, the skeleton that's set up right there? That's a person that actually has osteoporosis, and the reason that they're so far forward is you can see when the bones, I can't move, D. You see right here, you see how this bone right here is nice and squared off? You see how this bone right here, how when you have that compression fracture and it crunches forward, how it almost gives like this wedged look to it? Well, when that wedge happens, that person begins to move forward. When the one above it now has that extra stress on it and that crunch happens, well, then it starts to move forward. This is a person that has exponentially, like there's a lot of osteoporotic fractures. They probably have scoliosis too, don't get me wrong, but underneath of it and what it was saying was that there was multiple compression fractures in their spine that kept giving them that boom, 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 hunch forward look to it. So why is this important? I think osteoporosis is important to talk about, one, because it does affect people. And what if I give you the stat that if you have some sort of osteoporotic fracture and 20% of those people die within the next year, yeah, that's a big deal, right? Like I would want to know that. Might change the activities that I do. It might change what I eat. It might change, right? It's going to change a lot of stuff. But 44 million people in the United States have decreased bone loss. That's realistically 55% of the U.S. population that's over 50 years old. 1 in 2 Caucasian women. I'm going to go through, I think my next one. Yeah, my next one is the potential risk factors that you have. But the cost due to healthcare costs due to osteoporotic fracture goes into the billions of dollars. When they say billions of dollars, that's just immediate costs. They're not even talking long-term costs. Someone that, well, let's say someone that does go into a nursing home within that next year, that's not even brought into it. Physical therapy is not brought into it if you're using a cane after that or any sort of a walker after that. So all these things that start coming into play aren't even in that $1 billion mark. So when you look at that and start moving into that baby boomer era where there's people in their 60s, 65. So now we're talking about an industry that's billions of dollars. It realistically, over the next few years, how it's going to affect our nursing home status, how it's going to affect our loved ones, how it's going to affect all of that has to be thought about and how we're going to afford it as a country.
I know 3 elderly friends of mine, family members that were like vibrant, active, independent, no problem. You know, one of them, my grandmother, fell and broke her hip. She was gone in 6 months, but in that period of time, she went into a nursing home. She got dementia. You know,
it's crazy.
It was like the difference between night and day, and it was so hard to see this. There was nothing. There were no deficits before she fractured her hip.
Yeah.
And then it was a complete downhill trajectory.
And it is. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. When I go through, we already talked about what happens, the nursing home aspect of it. So this is getting just even outside of that osteoporosis aspect of it. But heavy metals are stored in the bone. And so a lot of times when people have a fracture, the heavy metal gets released into the system. And not all heavy metal, a lot of it likes neural tissue, like mercury likes the brain and the spinal cord. But when you start talking aluminum, start talking fluoride, lead, all of that gets stored in the bone. So when you have a fracture and it gets released back into the system, now you have free floating heavy metals that are back into the system again that once were absorbed by the bone and being held on to are now released and put out there.
So does that have something to do with why so many people die within a short period of time? 'Cause
I don't know. I can't say that, but but when you said the dementia aspect of it, well, dementia, there's a lot of correlation between dementia and then mercury and aluminum. Lead, I don't know as much. I haven't seen as many studies, but for sure aluminum and for sure mercury, and they do get leached out into the system. So can I say yes for sure? I don't know, but it's pretty darn.
Yeah, it's more than just.
It's a pretty strange coincidence that a lot of that, and it happens a lot like that. It's not weird. It's not abnormal. Yeah. So we start talking prevention. I mean, when I start looking at this, so female gender, yes. Caucasian or Asian, yes. Thin or small body frame, family history, yeah. My mother actually fell down 2 years ago. It was onto a rock and she broke her arm. And they don't think it was an osteoporotic break, but even if you get a fracture as an adult, that's still an indicator that more than likely there's some sort of osteoporotic issue going on. So already with my mom, I'm like, oh man. So yes, personal history of a fracture as an adult, no. Cigarette smoking, no. Excessive alcohol consumption at a point in my life, not anymore. Lack of exercise, no. But I'm like, right, I was in college for a long time, so a diet low in calcium, poor nutrition, all of those happen. Chemotherapy is definitely an issue, and I know they can focus it in and they can narrow it in. But I mean, if you have someone that has breast cancer and they had radiation, even I mean, adjusting here, you go and you adjust someone, you're like, rib fractures are very easy, very, very, very easy to happen. But chemotherapy, I mean, 30% of the population has had chemotherapy. It's a big stat.
This is the group of patients that I work with.
Yeah.
And it's one of the, you can never know too much is why I'm here.
Yeah.
But the other issue with that is that it's very typical. It's actually the standard of care that after chemotherapy for a hormone-positive cancer, they're put on aromatase inhibitors. The main side effect of aromatase inhibitors is osteoporosis.
I know, that's on my thing when we talk about or any hormone replacement therapy, one of the main side effects is osteoporosis.
And my problem is
you
that
nailed
doctors
it.
are dismissive. You know, I've had patients who have gone in and within a year have documented osteopenia
Mm-hmm.
from the start. Well, if they assessed it to begin with, which many of them don't.
Yeah.
I think that's like negligent.
Yeah.
But they've got documented osteopenia, and they're like, oh well, too bad, and they keep going, even though they can see the signs of demineralization.
Yeah.
Until it's osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And those drugs, at best, give women, they don't cure them or prevent it. It gives them maybe a 3 to 5% improvement in the statistics.
You said it.
Compare that to a 20% statistic of dying.
Yeah. Then you're like, well, what else should this is what I should do.
Right.
You're right. Every single one of those drugs, the Fosamax, anything that's supposed to stop demineralization or anything that's supposed to help restore bone restoration. I mean, I look at stats at how like efficient they are, and there's virtually nothing to horn about. I would say that. Yeah, you said it, like 3 to 5%. It's something like a change.
Well, the big thing I try to help
I'm like, you're
clients
right.
understand is that, I remember in college being given a book, How to Lie with Statistics, and this is it, because these doctors scare these women. Oh my God, you're going to die and you're going to get cancer if you don't take this. Well, it's not an absolute scale. It's relative.
Well, no.
So, you have a 4% chance if you don't take it, but you have a 7% chance if you do. So really we're talking about a 3% difference. But doctors 100%. Never take the time to explain this.
No.
And so and then I sound like I'm some heretic when I'm telling these women, like, you have to make an informed choice, and there's no guarantees, but to me, osteoporosis, not to mention the pain, the disability.
Yeah.
Dying from it is really horrible, but being disabled from it
is also really horrible.
It's a long, miserable death.
100%. I was like, dying from it is equally as miserable. Yeah, no, you definitely said it. I actually couldn't have said it better. The statistic part gets even. Lying with stats, that starts taking, like, my mind just goes into a whole nother realm as well, where I'm like, yeah, like there and there and there, and so yes,
So
you're preaching to the.
Anything that you can do naturally?
Yes.
Even at this age.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Chronic inflammation, I do want to talk about. Everything that I've read, it's more like rheumatoid arthritis or liver disease as far as chronic inflammation. But I do want to talk about diet too. There's different research side to side, but I want to at least discuss it, put it to your realm, and put it out there. So prevention, as of right now, most of it's lifestyle. And I'm going to give you different foods that are highest in certain nutrients, so different foods to look at. When you're buying a calcium supplement, what else do you want in it? And then we're also going to talk about stones, like renal stones or urinary tract stones, because that's a big part of it if you're taking a calcium supplement that's not utilized or absorbed. A high instance of kidney stones or bladder stones as well. Lifestyle, quitting smoking, yes. Decrease alcohol, yes. Exercising regularly. Exercise is the biggest one. So even with the different medications that they give you, whether it's to decrease to slow bone loss or to help remineralize bone, each of those medications, the other thing they always tell you have to do is weight-bearing exercise. They say you have to do weight-bearing exercise with these. The thing they don't tell you about that is weight-bearing exercise is the one thing you need to do anyway to help strengthen bone. So I'm going to show you Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law is super important if you have osteoporosis. Wolff's Law is the idea that if a bone is stressed in a certain manner, it will reform or rebuild itself in order to meet that stress. So first I'm going to show you on this x-ray. So this person right here, you want a cervical curve that's about 45 degrees. So you want a nice pulled back cervical. I don't have a thing in here, do I? You want a curve that has a nice 45 degree angle to it. Here, I'll actually show you. This right here is a 45 degree angle. So this person, they want the back part of these bones right lined up along the back of this. I'm going to put in this line. This yellow line right here is something that's called a gravity plane line. I drop those in so I can see where the weight of the head sits on those vertebrae. What I want is I want a gravity plane line. Let me see if I can move this. What you want is you want a gravity plane line that sits towards the, You want a gravity plane line that sits towards the back of these vertebrae. Because if it sits towards the back of the vertebra, that means that all of this bone right here is reinforcement. It's there to help stabilize the head, because your head weighs 10 to 15 pounds. But each inch that head goes forward, it puts an additional 10 to 15 pounds of pressure on that spine. So someone that's right here, ear right over the shoulder, beautiful. That curve is there to stabilize it. That's what it's there to do. It's going to hold all of that weight, all the reinforcements put in the back of the joint. Perfect. Pressure taken off the disc. Good. Ear comes forward 1 inch. Well, now we're talking 15 to 20. Now we're talking 15 to 20 pounds, or no, 10 to 15, 20 to 30, excuse me. Now you're talking 20 to 30 pounds of pressure onto that spine. But that pressure isn't put on the back of those joints. This pressure, this is the gravity plane line with this person. That's where gravity goes through. So right here, right at that C2 and C3, the pressure goes through the bone and through that joint. But when you start getting out here, there's 2, 3, 4, there's C5 and C6, C7. At C7, this line's supposed to go right through the center of this bone. It doesn't even touch it. Because all of that weight of gravity is being put on the front part of those 3 bones, look what happens to those bones. You see how they start growing bone off the front of them? You saw how they start lipping and start spurring, and they start getting all of that arthritic change off the front of it. The reason that's happened is because all that weight's going out front. The law of Wolff's law is in play during that time. That body feels so threatened and so stressed in that area that the body takes the strongest thing that it has, which is bone, and it starts putting bone down to help stabilize that vertebra. And it wants to stabilize that vertebra because that vertebra is protecting the most vital thing that that person has, its nervous system that's moving throughout it. Does that make sense? So the complete reverse can happen too. If you have someone, if you have someone that swims, a swimmer, right? Because my grandma was a swimmer. If you have someone that swims on a regular basis and that's their form of exercise, that's their form of strengthening their muscle or strengthening their joint, and that's what they decide to do. Why do people work out in water?
Because it releases the weight.
Nailed it, because it removes the pressure off the joint. But you have to have pressure being put onto those muscles and being put onto those joints, because when that muscle attaches into that bone, when it feels that extra pressure being pulled against it or being attaching into it, and they can feel that tensile strength or that pressure or that tensile compression, thank you, up against it, then the bone does what it's supposed to do, and it's like, whoa, I have extra pressure being put on these areas. I need to reinforce where this muscle is at because I need to keep it as strong as possible because this is where I feel the stress. So with Wolff's law is super important when it comes to osteoporosis because those are the things that's going to keep that bone as strong as it can. The hard part is that you need to do weight-bearing exercise, and I would do full body workouts. So any full body workout, I mean, you can do squats, you can do push-ups, you can do sit-ups, osteoporosis is a little tough, but you can plank, you can do lunges, you can do anything that's using your weight or that you're bearing weight as you take that muscle through a motion, because everywhere it attaches into is going to help reinforce that bone. Does that make sense? So Wolff's law is super, super, super important when it comes to osteoporosis. The bone will always remodel wherever the stress is. It's not stupid. It's not dumb. It does it because it's incredibly intelligent. It does it because it's smart. So if it's not being used, if you don't use it, you lose it.
So everything you said you could do without actually using it.
You don't have to have weight. Yeah, you don't need weight. So for these people, they're like, oh, I don't want to lift weights. I don't want to do this, that, or the other. Okay, you don't have to, but you have to do some sort of full body exercise or full body movement in order to get at least big muscle groups. I'm not even saying little tiny stabilizing muscle groups, which I also think is equally important when it comes to posture and how someone holds themselves. But as far as just trying to reinforce that bone, full body workouts for sure. And no, you don't have to lift weights. Should you? I think you should lift weight. I think lifting weight's important, but you don't have to as far as this comes. So nutrition. So if someone decides to take a calcium supplement, there's a couple forms that you want to look out for that are poor forms of calcium because the body can't absorb it. Calcium Oxalate is one of them. Calcium oxalate also is known to cause urinary stones. So just so you know, the body can't use it. It's in a lot of forms of calcium. So
Can you spell that?
oxalate, it's Oxylate. It's a form that can't be used. And then calcium citrate is also a form that can't be utilized.
Almost all of them have that.
Yes, almost all of them have that.
So I've looked at it before.
Yeah, so almost all of them do have that, and the reason that they have that is they'll take like shells, and they'll grind it up, and then they'll use the shell in order to
Add calcium
yeah, but it's a really poor form of calcium as far as
for us.
yeah. So you're better off getting calcium from food sources if you can, right? We don't eat shells. We never have. We've never been known as humans to eat shells. That's not really our thing. Maybe accidental.
Get in there with your moisture.